At 7:42 p.m. Eastern, synchronized outages rolled across multiple states. Not cascading failures, not storms. Clean separations. Load was shed in blocks, then neighborhoods, then entire residential zones, while industrial parks, ports, data centers, and commercial corridors stayed lit like nothing was wrong. Officials called it load balancing. Engineers explained frequency stability. Utilities spoke in calm sentences about rotational outages. But people noticed patterns, and patterns tell stories.
One nurse in Baltimore messaged us saying their hospital didn't lose power, but everything else dimmed. Hallway lights reduced. Non-essential equipment powered down. She said it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Another message from a high-rise resident in Seattle. Elevators stopped between floors. People waited in the dark until firefighters came with lanterns and patience. Nobody panicked. That's what's eerie. People adapted faster than anyone expected.
Technically, the grid can do this. Modern electrical systems are segmented, prioritized, automated. Critical infrastructure sits on protected feeders. Residential areas are flexible, meaning expendable when supply tightens. Algorithms decide where electrons flow. Tonight, Americans saw those decisions in real time. Electricity stopped being a background assumption and became a scheduled privilege.
And families learned the schedule fast. We're hearing about people cooking entire meals at 3 a.m. because that's when their power window opens. Parents telling kids to charge tablets like they're packing for evacuation. One listener said their refrigerator has become a clock. They know when the power's back because it hums again.
If you're listening without power right now, practical note: keep refrigerators and freezers closed. Every opening dumps cold air you may not get back for hours. Charge battery packs during your window. Use LED lanterns instead of candles if you have them. Fire departments are already overwhelmed.
And then there's the money. Alex, the tone shifted this morning when people realized the banks weren't broken. They were unavailable.
Right. No alarms, no crashes. Apps still opened. Balances still displayed. But withdrawals failed. Transfers stalled. Branches closed temporarily. People stood in lines that didn't move, staring at numbers they couldn't touch. Money hadn't vanished, but access had. And access, it turns out, is what ownership really means.
A listener from New Jersey said everyone in line was polite. Too polite. They weren't angry yet. They were doing math in their heads. Rent, food, gas, what can wait, what can't. Another message came in from a small business owner who said payroll showed as complete, but employees didn't get paid. He said, wait, I didn't lose my money. I lost my ability to use it.
From a systems perspective, this is containment. Limiting liquidity slows panic. It also slows life. Banks rely on settlement networks, clearinghouses, overnight liquidity. When those pause, the front end still looks fine. The screen reassures you. The back end quietly says no.
And psychologically, that's worse than a crash. A crash is loud. This is silent. People keep refreshing apps like it's a ritual. Like if they look often enough, access will return.
Actionable advice here. If you have cash, ration it. Not because it's disappearing, but because replacement may not be possible. If you don't have cash, document everything. Screenshots, statements. This isn't about distrust. It's about memory when systems reboot.
And then fuel followed the same script. Stations open, prices posted, pumps unresponsive.
Fuel wasn't gone. It was redirected. Emergency services first. Logistics hubs second. Authorized use only after that. Commuting ended not with bans, but with futility. Trucks slowed. Deliveries staggered. Ambulances calculated routes like chess moves.
One message from a paramedic says they now decide calls based on distance and probability. That sentence shouldn't exist. Another from a grocery clerk who said shelves aren't empty, but they're frozen in time. No restocks, no rhythm.
Fuel isn't about travel. It's about food, medicine, and time. When fuel is controlled, movement becomes a privilege. And when movement slows, everything else follows.
People are adapting again. Carpool networks forming overnight, neighborhood food sharing. Someone wrote, "I met more neighbors today than in the last 5 years." Crisis compresses distance between strangers.
What ties all of this together isn't collapse. It's calibration. Power, money, fuel still there, just selectively accessible. Managed scarcity. And the realization settling in across the country is simple and terrifying. Rights feel like rights until they're reclassified as resources.
But here's the human part, and it matters. People are helping each other, sharing outlets, sharing rides, sharing information. Systems may be managed from above, but survival still happens at ground level.
We'll stay on as long as the signal holds. If you're listening, you're not alone in this moment. Charge what you can. Rest when you can. Talk to the people around you. And remember, awareness is the first form of resilience.
This is Night Signal. Wherever you are, however much light you have left, stay with us.
Good evening. This is Night Signal. I'm Alex Mercer, speaking to anyone still listening from whatever device, whatever network, whatever last flicker of connection you can find. The world as we knew it online has changed, and if you're hearing me, it means you're still clinging to whatever line of sight remains. The internet, it didn't crash. It didn't vanish. It went quiet. Piece by piece, site by site, feed by feed, the flow of information fractured. Streaming froze mid-frame. Chats stalled mid-sentence. Messages arrived hours or days late, or sometimes never at all. And in that silence, America stopped existing as a single shared reality. The very thing that made us feel connected, the constant hum of news, social media, and updates, became a fractured mirror. People in Boston were reading different headlines than people in Dallas, who were hearing rumors in their local Facebook group that never made it elsewhere. Live streams froze like paused windows into someone else's world, and suddenly millions of interpretations existed side by side, each as real and as urgent as the next, yet entirely disconnected. Rumors traveled faster than facts, and the meaning of truth became local, not national. People were online but blind, connected but uninformed, and in that darkness of knowledge, confusion became the new shared experience.
I've been reading your messages all evening, Alex, and the human stories are staggering. A teacher in Philadelphia wrote to say her class can no longer log into any platform. They're using whiteboards and chalk like it's 1982. She said the students are restless, not because they don't want to learn, but because they can't agree on what exists. A family in Portland told us that when they tried to check news about the wildfire nearby, their feeds froze and only partial reports arrived. The father said his children argued about what was true, and by the end of the night he realized he didn't know either. Everywhere we look, people are learning that information is no longer something that comes to them automatically. It is earned, pieced together, interpreted, and sometimes invented.
And that fragmentation carries consequences. Without a shared narrative, coordination fails. Local emergency services can't assume that everyone has the same warnings. Communities can't act together, because together no longer exists in any meaningful way. Practical survival tips suddenly become the rarest commodity. If your local news feed is down, you don't know when or if a storm is approaching, whether your power will be restored, or if the stores around you will open. And people start improvising, relying on word of mouth, on paper notes posted in windows, on the voices of neighbors. Radio, in this context, becomes not just entertainment, it becomes lifeline. That's why you're listening now, because we still broadcast a thread, even if the internet refuses to weave it together.
Listeners have been telling us how strange it feels to be online and yet entirely cut off from consensus. One person in Kansas City said, "It's like everyone is speaking a different language. I can read posts from 5 miles away and not know if they're real or someone's imagination. I feel like I'm in 10 different towns at once." Another in Miami said that online trading groups, usually their lifeline for grocery and fuel swaps, stopped updating, and members began scavenging through text messages and phone calls trying to recreate a system that had evaporated. The irony is brutal. Connectivity is no longer a tool for efficiency. It's a mirror for isolation.
And while people are navigating this fractured reality, another layer of strain has arrived. The emergency alert system never stopped. Phones buzzed hourly. Notifications appeared in patterns meant to guide, to instruct, to protect. But repetition doesn't create safety. When the instructions are constant, contradictory, and unending, the mind begins to tune out. Remain calm, avoid public areas, report suspicious activity. Alerts that once commanded attention now fade into background noise. People stop reading them, not out of apathy, but exhaustion. And the tragedy of constant warnings is simple. When urgency dies, authority follows. No one listens, no one believes, and the very institutions intended to guide survival risk becoming invisible.
I've seen that fatigue firsthand. Listeners describe living in a state of alert fatigue. A mother in Detroit said her phone has buzzed every 15 minutes since yesterday morning. She doesn't check anymore. She leaves the alerts on silent. Another listener in Atlanta says his building posts alerts in the lobby in printed signs, but residents shrug at them. They've started to measure danger by what actually affects them, not by the instructions the government sends. And that's a critical shift. The very authority that keeps us coordinated is losing its signal in the human mind.
Practical advice here. Prioritize your own alerts. Choose 1 or 2 trusted sources. Don't try to respond to every instruction. Keep physical backups for essential info. Maps, neighborhood contacts, local radio frequencies. Your survival depends not on following every directive, but on maintaining discernment when the system itself has stopped functioning coherently.
And then there's the strange, invisible layer of tension that has crept into something as ordinary as shopping. The day normal transactions became suspicious is a day most people didn't mark with a calendar, but they'll remember it forever. Grocery stores, convenience shops, even corner cafes now feel like surveillance chambers. Cash draws attention. Cards fail unpredictably. Receipts stop printing. Clerks hesitate, glance around, and suddenly a simple purchase is an act of negotiation with an unseen authority. People have learned to blend in, to avoid standing out, to minimize notice. Survival now includes behavioral camouflage.
Exactly. Buying milk or bread is no longer automatic. It requires strategy. Timing matters. The method of payment matters. One listener from Chicago said she buys groceries in bulk at odd hours, avoids conversation with staff, and carries minimal digital identifiers. Another from Phoenix explained that even using cash comes with tension. Clerks ask questions they're not supposed to ask, and the question, "Is this allowed today?" becomes a silent mantra for every transaction.
And this isn't paranoia. These behaviors are adaptive. People are learning that systems can scrutinize and ration in ways invisible to the eye. One listener described the psychological load as heavier than any physical shortage. I have the food, I have the money, but I can't be sure I can use either without consequences. It's exhausting just to exist normally. That's what's new. Normality itself has become hazardous.
Which is why we're asking you tonight to document everything. Keep records, track purchases, save screenshots, note times and places. If the digital fails, your survival depends on paper memory, human memory, and shared information you can trust. Behavioral awareness is now as important as resource management.
The emotional toll is staggering. People feel like strangers in their own lives, strangers in their neighborhoods. Everyday tasks, the drive to the store, sending a message, charging a phone, have become fraught with tension. Communities are trying to adapt, improvising rules, sharing resources quietly, and re-establishing trust on micro levels because macro systems no longer hold. And amidst this chaos, the human response is the only stabilizing force left.
So here's what we're telling you on Night Signal. Keep connected, but critically. Trust neighbors, but verify. Move deliberately, but cautiously. Use what you can, preserve what you must, and blend your awareness with patience. The world may have fragmented, alerts may be relentless, transactions may be scrutinized, but human resilience remains. And if you're listening, that's proof you're still part of the chain.
Stay with us tonight, wherever you are. Your devices may flicker, your feeds may fail, but as long as you hear us, you are not alone. Humanity continues, not because systems allow it, but because people do. And that, Alex, is the final truth we can rely on.
This is Night Signal. Wherever you are, however fractured your world, however scrutinized your actions, you are still here. And if you are still here, there is hope. Good evening, and welcome back to Night Signal. I'm Alex Mercer, speaking to anyone still listening from the dim corners of cities, the flickering neighborhoods, or wherever your last functioning device allows. Tonight, we continue documenting a country quietly unraveling, not in explosions, not in panic, but in silence, in absence, in the slow disappearance of normality. Tonight, we're talking about the subtle breakdowns, the systems we take for granted that no longer work as they should. Grocery stores that stayed open but felt empty, government websites that stopped updating, paychecks that arrived late or didn't arrive at all, and the cold, mechanical collapse of customer service.
And Alex, what's striking is how quiet it all feels from the ground level. People don't see disasters, they feel their absence. I've been reading your messages all evening and there's a thread running through them. Normal life is now unreliable. Grocery stores are open, yes, but visiting one is like walking through a set of rules you don't understand. Essentials vanish first. Bread, milk, eggs, toilet paper. Shelves remain partially stocked, which is worse than bare shelves because it gives hope. Hope that quickly evaporates. Restocking slows without explanation. Employees stop answering questions because they literally do not know. One listener in Denver said they have started memorizing delivery schedules like secret codes, noting who restocks what on which day, and keeping that knowledge as private as money under a mattress. Food exists, yes, but only briefly, unpredictably, without guarantee.
And from a logistical perspective, it's not random. Supply chains have become fragile, reliant on fuel, communication, and a workforce that itself is affected by the wider failures. Trucks arrive late, sometimes empty. Warehouses divert shipments based on priorities invisible to the public. Stores can appear open while shelves remain patchy. And when the workforce is exhausted or misinformed, employees can no longer provide guidance, leaving customers adrift. The human side of this is critical. People are learning that availability is ephemeral. If you see something on a shelf, you take it, or risk losing it for days, maybe weeks.
Listeners describe the psychological tension of shopping now. One in Minneapolis said the trip to the store is no longer about buying food. It's about timing, observation, and negotiation. Every aisle has a silent clock. When will the next delivery arrive? Which items will vanish first? Which items will remain untouched for hours? She said she now keeps a notebook with delivery notes, jotting down what arrives, what disappears, and which aisles are safe.
And while people are navigating the chaos of grocery stores, the digital front has gone silent. Government websites, the supposed source of clarity, have stopped updating. Press releases freeze mid-crisis. Dashboards stop refreshing. Last updated timestamps grow old. And suddenly, the absence of information weighs heavier than bad news ever could. The silence itself becomes confirmation. Someone has lost control. or someone has chosen not to speak.
Listeners describe the experience like watching a clock stop mid-tick. A teacher in Philadelphia said she would check the local health department dashboard daily, but now it hasn't updated in 5 days. A father in Atlanta said he logs in to check emergency alerts and economic assistance programs, but every page loads blank or frozen. He told me that emptiness feels intentional, like someone is letting a line go cold to see who survives without instruction. That uncertainty becomes a silent oppressor. Without updates, people must decide for themselves what to do.
And the consequences ripple outward. Without guidance, trust in institutions erodes. Decisions become personal, improvisational, and sometimes dangerous. Should you travel to get supplies? Should you stay home? Should you rely on neighbors? Every choice carries a weight that it never did before, because the systems designed to reduce risk are now unavailable.
Then there are the paychecks. A slow bleed first, then a full stop. Employers blame processing delays. Banks blame system upgrades. But the effect is universal. People wait. Bills don't wait. Rent doesn't wait. Food doesn't wait. One listener in Phoenix described it as a cruel arithmetic problem. The numbers in your account may exist, but without access, they are meaningless. Another in Boston said, I went to the ATM to see my balance, and it's the same number I saw last week, but I can't withdraw anything. I can't buy anything. I realize employment means nothing without infrastructure, and infrastructure is quietly dissolving around me.
This is a critical lesson for anyone listening. Money, employment, even access to essential services depends on more than your paycheck or your balance. It depends on the systems maintaining that flow. When infrastructure fails quietly, survival becomes local. Trust shifts from institutions to the micro, your neighbors, your community, the few functioning systems you can verify in person.
And that micro-level adaptation extends into the final collapse we need to discuss tonight: customer service. Call centers vanish offline. Automated messages loop endlessly. There's no one to escalate to, no human to reason with, no empathy on the other end of the line. The systems designed to function without humans now operate without care. One listener in Chicago said she tried to report a failed transaction, waited 45 minutes listening to loops, and hung up realizing there was nobody. Another in Houston described a similar experience trying to contact a utility company. The automated voice offered steps that no longer applied. It felt like speaking into a void, he said, and that void, it judges you.
It's an eerie clarity. Systems optimized for efficiency over empathy continue, but without oversight, without humanity, they become indifferent. Frustration rises, anxiety rises, and people learn very fast that self-reliance is no longer just preferable, it is mandatory.
What's remarkable, though, Alex, is how people are adapting in real time. They're creating local support networks. They're keeping notebooks, marking delivery schedules, memorizing routes, and sharing knowledge quietly. One family in Portland described coordinating shopping with 4 other households to ensure that when goods arrive, no one is left behind. The patterns of human resilience are emerging in stark contrast to the cold silence of institutions.
So here's what we can share with anyone listening tonight. Plan your essentials in cycles. Document availability. Trust physical observation over digital promises. Build micro-networks with neighbors or colleagues. Keep records of payments, deliveries, and communications. And remember that the collapse is gradual, but human adaptation can outpace it if you're vigilant and strategic.
Tonight, listeners, the lesson is this. The systems we depended on, grocery supply chains, government updates, banks, and customer support, can all fail without warning. But humans persist. Humans observe, memorize, coordinate, and survive. That's the story unfolding in real time, and it's the story we continue to tell here on Night Signal.
Stay with us. Keep listening. Document, share, observe. The silence is not the end. It's a signal, and you are still receiving it.
Wherever you are, however fragile your connections, however unreliable the world feels, you are not alone. Night Signal is still here, and so are you.
We've spoken before about power grids, banks, grocery stores, and collapsing digital systems. Tonight, we turn our attention to a more subtle yet equally profound shift. The very act of moving through the country, travel, has become a risk instead of a freedom. Airports are open but hollow. Flights are canceled without explanation. Trains run sporadically. Roads are still there, but using them requires justification, permission, or sheer luck. People are no longer visiting family because returning is no longer guaranteed. And when freedom of movement disappears, the fabric of human connection begins to unravel.
Listeners are writing in with stories that are at once mundane and terrifying. A woman in Seattle says she drove 3 hours to see her parents and spent the night wondering if she would be able to make it back. Flights she had booked months in advance were canceled midweek without notice, and the airline offered no explanation beyond generic apologies. A man in Chicago tried to take a commuter train to a meeting and waited for over 2 hours before the train simply didn't arrive. People are learning the rules of travel are no longer predictable. They are opaque, shifting, and enforced in ways that make leaving home a calculated gamble.
From a logistical perspective, these disruptions are almost deliberate in their effect. Transport infrastructure depends on coordination, fuel, personnel, and communication. When any of these falter, the network fragments. Airports remain staffed, but flights are unstaffed. Tracks remain clear, but trains wait idle. Roads are passable, but checkpoints, unpredictable closures, and fuel limitations make planning a journey almost impossible. And the human impact is immediate. Birthdays missed, family events lost, medical appointments delayed. Travel becomes not freedom. It becomes a transaction with chance itself, and chance is unkind.
A listener in Dallas wrote, "We don't visit our relatives because it's like rolling dice. You may get there, you may not. We're learning to live in the spaces between certainty and chaos." Another in Boston described the anxiety of children watching planes take off and land from the window of their apartment, imagining trips they can no longer take. That's the new reality. Mobility is a privilege rationed by circumstance rather than law. And that rationing extends beyond physical travel. Emotional distance grows when journeys are no longer reliable and the human cost of unpredictability begins to compound.
Which leads us to a broader realization Americans are facing for the first time. Systems do not restart easily. Temporary disruptions, power, internet, transport, have stretched indefinitely. Promised repairs are announced, but never completed. People wait for a reset that never arrives. And in this prolonged suspension, a truth emerges slowly but unavoidably. Modern systems are fragile. Infrastructure built on continuous operation, constant demand, and automated maintenance does not reset like a machine when it stops. Restarting requires trust, cooperation, and momentum. Things in painfully short supply when faith in institutions has already been eroded.
Listeners are describing the psychological impact of this in vivid terms. One teacher in Philadelphia said, "We are all waiting for the moment things go back to normal, but there is no normal to return to. Each day stretches like elastic, and the promise of a reset becomes a cruel joke." A father in Atlanta said he stopped checking official websites for updates because the data freezes, dashboards never refresh, and every timestamp eventually grows meaningless. People wait hours, then days, then weeks, hoping for fixes that never materialize, and slowly patience gives way to adaptation. We've learned collectively that temporary disruption can become permanent if trust in the system vanishes.
That erosion of trust is most evident in the communications Americans now receive from utilities and corporations. Notices arrive, carefully worded. Apologies for inconvenience, requests for patience, reminders of understanding. Repairs are always promised for soon, but soon never arrives. Apologies have replaced action, and people understand, finally, that an apology costs nothing, but a solution costs everything. One listener in Phoenix said, "When the email arrives saying, 'We regret the inconvenience,' I realize it is not a promise. It is a declaration that nothing will change. That's cheaper than fixing the problem, and we are expected to accept it.
Exactly. Another listener described sitting with her neighbors, reading through the latest emails from their water utility. Schedules changed, repairs postponed, explanations vague. She said the words are comforting, but the faucets don't run any faster. It's a strange, hollow reassurance. People are recognizing the pattern. Institutions have learned that words maintain the appearance of control while action requires resources, coordination, and risk. When systems fail, words are cheaper than repairs, and apologies become a substitute for functionality.
Practical advice here is simple but critical. Track what is promised versus what is delivered. Document outages, failed repairs, and communication from utilities. Do not rely on apologies to sustain your life. Prepare local, physical solutions where possible. Water storage, backup power, local community cooperation. The moment you trust words over action is the moment you become vulnerable.
Listeners are adapting. Communities share information about which local suppliers are functioning. Neighbors coordinate water collection or generator sharing. People are learning to read the patterns behind the apologies, predicting when limited resources will actually appear. Survival has shifted from dependence on institutions to reliance on observation, memory, and local networks.
And that brings us full circle, listeners. Travel is uncertain, systems do not restart automatically, and apologies replace solutions. But humans persist. Each adaptation, each careful calculation, each shared note or whispered tip becomes a thread in the network of survival. While infrastructure fails, the human network expands, quietly, organically, resiliently.
Tonight, as always, we ask you to take note of what you see, what you hear, and what you can control. Travel only when necessary. Observe the promises of institutions critically. Keep physical records. Share knowledge. Build trust locally, because trust nationally may no longer exist. And remember that the world may be failing quietly around you, but human connection is still possible if we listen, learn, and act.
This is Night Signal. Wherever you are, however uncertain the systems you rely on may seem, you are not alone. Humanity persists not through words or websites or emails, but through observation, adaptation, and care for one another. And if you are listening, that's proof you are still part of that persistence.
Stay vigilant, stay connected to your neighbors, and continue to learn. The lights may flicker, the systems may falter, but the human network, the one that truly matters, is still alive.
And we'll stay here as long as we can broadcast. This is Night Signal, and if you hear us, that is enough to keep hope alive, one voice at a time. We turn our attention to the systems Americans have relied on for safety, for continuity, for trust, insurance, schools, and the procedural architecture that kept daily life running. These are the silent collapses, the ones without alarms, without fires, without explosions, but no less devastating.
Listeners, what's remarkable is how slow and invisible these failures are. Let's start with insurance. The day it stopped, meaning protection, is the day people realized that paper promises can't replace action. Claims went unanswered. Policies that once guaranteed safety became meaningless. Exclusions expanded overnight. You could hold a valid policy in your hand and watch it do nothing when disaster struck. One listener in Chicago said they filed a claim after a minor flood only to receive a notice citing a technicality that had never mattered before. I realized, she wrote, that my protection had never been real. It was a contract I'd paid for, not a safety net I could rely on. The human cost here is psychological as much as financial. The sense that the world is suddenly stranger, rules arbitrary, safety illusory.
And the mechanics behind it are simple but cruel. Policies remain valid on paper because they exist in databases and legal frameworks. But when systems fail, when claims processing freezes, when approvals stall, when underwriters no longer respond, coverage effectively evaporates. The insured person continues to pay premiums, but the protective function of insurance has become a ghost. Survival in this context depends on redundancy outside the system, savings, local support networks, and careful anticipation of risks that can no longer be outsourced to contracts or corporations.
And then there are the schools. Closures didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no sweeping announcement saying closed permanently. Remote learning faded quietly. Buildings sat locked. Systems went dark. Childhood paused indefinitely. One parent in New York wrote that their child's school portal stopped updating 3 weeks ago. Teachers didn't respond to messages. Lessons, assignments, and schedules simply vanished. And in that absence, education became a memory rather than a promise. Something children remembered but could no longer access. The effect is subtle but profound. A generation learning to navigate uncertainty not in theory, but in lived experience.
From a systemic perspective, this is a symptom of automation and procedural reliance. Schools depend on communication infrastructure, digital systems, and coordination with parents and staff. When those systems fail, the human fallback is insufficient. Doors remain locked, networks unresponsive, and learning cannot be forced back online. Students, parents, and teachers alike are left suspended, inhabiting a space where the routines of life continue only in fragments. And the psychological weight of that suspension is as real as any physical scarcity. Boredom, frustration, loss of progress, the gradual erasure of structured growth.
Listeners are describing children who now structure their own days or don't structure them at all. One mother in Atlanta said her son spends hours waiting for assignments that never arrive, checking a portal that freezes, attempting to maintain focus while the world around him continues to fragment. Another parent wrote about teenagers turning to informal study groups, but even those are haphazard, unpredictable, and fragile. Education is no longer an institution. It is improvised, sporadic, and dependent on circumstance rather than design.
And that brings us to the final topic tonight, the procedural collapse, which is perhaps the most invisible of all. The collapse wasn't loud. It was procedural. Forms replaced explosions. Emails replaced sirens. Access revoked quietly. Permissions expired. Nothing burned, but everything stopped working. Utilities, banks, transport, insurance, schools, everywhere the system functioned as designed, but the design itself was insufficient for a prolonged crisis. It was engineered to operate under routine, not under disruption. The moment that routine fractured, the machinery of daily life ground to a halt.
Listeners described the experience as a slow strangulation. One in Los Angeles said, "I try to log in to manage my account, and the system times out. I call support, and the automated messages loop endlessly. I realize that nobody is on the other side. Everything depends on a chain of approvals, and the chain is gone." Another listener in Philadelphia explained that paperwork they once trusted, permits, applications, registration forms, became meaningless. Deadlines passed, and nobody cared. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't violent, but it was total. Functionality disappeared quietly, replaced by silence, waiting, and uncertainty.
What's critical to understand here is the fragility of modern systems. Efficiency comes at the cost of resilience. Processes are optimized for speed, cost, and standardization. But when disruption strikes, there is no redundancy built into the system. The very mechanisms meant to facilitate life, online portals, automated notifications, hierarchical approvals, become barriers when humans cannot intervene. Procedural collapse is invisible until it is total, and by the time the realization arrives, adaptation is already mandatory.
And listeners are adapting. Communities are improvising their own procedures. Notes are passed on neighborhood bulletin boards. Informal agreements replace contracts. Local knowledge substitutes for institutional memory. One community in Denver established a shared ledger to track water availability, deliveries, and services because the official systems failed completely. People are learning to treat permissions, forms, and schedules as optional rather than guaranteed, and to operate independently while observing neighbors and local networks. Survival, once mediated by institutions, now requires improvisation, observation, and local trust.
Practical advice for anyone listening tonight. Document interactions, track resources independently, and rely on human networks over automated systems. Recognize that procedures can fail quietly. Don't wait for an official fix. Prepare for prolonged suspension. Back up digital records physically. Observe patterns locally. Anticipate that the next interruption may be permanent. Adaptation is no longer optional. It is necessary.
The emotional toll of this slow unraveling is profound. Listeners describe frustration, despair, anxiety, and even grief, not for disaster, but for absence. Silence replaces sound. Emails replace sirens. Paperwork replaces action. The collapse is procedural, quiet, and invisible, but it is also real, immediate, and demanding. People are learning that resilience requires more than compliance. It requires imagination, strategy, and communal observation.
Tonight, as always, Night Signal reminds you, systems can fail, collapse, or disappear without warning. Insurance can become useless. Schools can close without explanation. Procedures can stop functioning, quietly, without drama. But human adaptation persists. Observing, memorizing, improvising, and sharing, these are the true systems that endure.
Stay vigilant. Stay connected to those around you. Keep records. Observe patterns. Adapt locally. And remember, the collapse may be procedural, but humanity persists through attention, care, and action. The world may fail silently, but we do not have to.
This is Night Signal. We'll remain here as long as we can broadcast. And if you are listening, that is enough to keep hope alive. You are part of the network that cannot be automated, silenced, or suspended. And so, listeners, as the signal fades and the night grows heavier, remember this. The systems we relied on, the power, the money, the fuel, the internet, the schools, the procedures, may falter. They may fragment. They may fail quietly or unpredictably. But you are still here. You are still listening. And that matters.
Every observation you make, every connection you maintain, every act of care and adaptation, those are the threads that hold the world together when the rest unravels. Tonight, we have witnessed absence, fragility, and silence. But we have also witnessed resilience, ingenuity, and quiet courage.
Hold on to that. Document what you see. Share what you know. Look to your neighbors, your community, your friends. Systems may collapse, instructions may loop endlessly, and promises may be broken. But humanity, connection, and awareness persist.
This is Night Signal. Wherever you are, whatever you can still reach, whatever light or voice you have left, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and stay alive. And know this, you are never truly alone, as long as someone is listening and someone is telling the story.
From all of us here, thank you for holding the signal with us tonight. Sleep when you can, prepare when you must, and keep watching. We'll be here next time, sharing the stories no one else will tell.
Good night, America. Keep your lights close, your minds sharper, and your hearts even closer.